Lee Wilwerding. Now here's a short summary of Lee's background. Graduated from college, then served as a lieutenant in the U.S. Army. After his active Army service, Lee spent 40 years with the Dayton-Hudson Company, now Target, Ernst & Young Consultants, and many other well-known companies. As a practitioner, consultant in logistics, supply chain management. Concurrent with his work in the real world, Lee continued his military career for 24 years in the Army Reserve, retiring as a lieutenant colonel. Lee has been very active in Hilton Head's civic community, serving as president of the World Affairs Council Board of Directors and chairman of the Greater Island Council. Please join me in welcoming our friend and neighbor, Lee Wilwerding.
The education process that I'm going to talk about started after I graduated from college. I got a degree in history from St. John's with a concentration in modern Europe and American history. And some of you have been victimized by my presentations on the Revolution so far. The interesting thing about St. John's, it's out in the middle of nowhere when it began in 1856. The county that it's in was heavily populated with Germans. The bishop needed to find Catholic priests, and he ended up going to Latrobe, Pennsylvania, to St. Vincent's Arch Abbey to con the abbot into providing monks for St. John's in what was known as the Indian Bush when they first opened up. So 5 of them came in 1856, and the university was started shortly thereafter. The Abbey has 3,030 acres in central Minnesota. This campus obviously doesn't occupy all of those, maybe 100. And this white building, and all these red brick ones, and this one were there when I was there. All the rest of it is new. And the football field, which is a natural bowl. And in the fall, you will not find a better place to watch a football game because this hill is all oak and maple trees. And it is stunning. That's what the Abbey looked like in the 1890s. This is a quadrangle was built, and that's what they stayed with, basically, for another 60 years. And the new abbot said, we've outgrown most of what we have, and it's time to expand. And so they went out to Marcel Breuer, who is a Bauhaus architect, to do a plan and then to start building. So they went from the church I just showed you to this one. And if you're an architecture fan in the 1960s, that particular church was on the cover of every architecture magazine in the U.S. And that's the inside. And it is very much a Bauhaus architectural structure. But there's a real reason that you get all of these cement holes. Is the pews here are the monks and brothers on both sides. And this was still the era of Gregorian chant. So they would have 5 sessions a day, starting in the morning and going to Vespers, that they all assembled in the church and they sang. It was stunning because the acoustics are absolutely fantastic. Behind the red screen, when I was there, was a 3,000 pipe Holtkamp organ, which is German manufactured. Today, it is a 6,000 pipe Holtkamp Posse organ, and it was just finished in 2019. And I have not been back since then. But it's still on my list of things to do. Because it was fantastic when it was 3,000 pipes, and I can only imagine. So they had to decapitate the church in order to get the bells out of the towers. Because the bells that are on the banner were up here in the towers at the time, and they didn't want to detract from the architectural presence of that church. Because when you turn off the freeway I-94 onto the overpass, your eyes takes you right down to that church. It stands out. And that's what the church looks like on the inside, or did look like. Because this is still here, and now it's used as an interior reception hall and event space. This is what is known as Christ's Pantocrator. And if you wander around in various Romanesque churches in Europe, you're going to see that on the apse of a lot of churches. It's a very common architectural style. And since we're in Minnesota and I'm showing you everything is green, I have to be honest, that chapel is across the lake from the campus. And it was built in the 1890s. There's a pathway that goes along the shoreline. When I was there, it was in disrepair. The first time I went to that chapel was in January. There was 1.5 feet of snow on the lake, but it was the shortest way to get there. And I did mention this little place, and there is a connection between St. John's and Lake Wobegon. We'll go into detail in the Q&A if you want. But the president of the college when I was there, a PhD in history, taught church history, was the president of college. It was his goal and dream to create public radio stations throughout the state of Minnesota. And Minnesota Public Radio was created. A gentleman by the name of Keeler was hired to be a classical music disc jockey. So just looking at some life events, graduated in '66, commissioned at Riley, ordered to active duty on the 3rd of November. En route, I went to AGM, Adjutant General Corps Officer Basic Course at Fort Benjamin Harrison. To those of us that were there, it was known as Uncle Ben's Rest Home. It was without a doubt the most non-military compound you can imagine, because it was a school for the AG Corps and with personnel and paper shufflers. The finance school was there, and the Defense Information School, and that's it. It's only 2,600 acres. It's smaller than the campus. It is now closed, except for the golf course, which is a state park today. It was an early victim of BRAC. So I finished on the 20th of January, got married on the 28th, and I left a week later to look at the time. Because I had orders, and Uncle took 4 months before he finally got around to getting my wife over there. She went back to teaching at what I call the State Finishing School for Girls. Its official title is the Minnesota Reform School for Girls. But if you notice the timing, she arrived the 25th of May, and surprisingly enough, my son arrived 9 months later, almost to the day. So my duty station was in Heidelberg. You couldn't pick a better place. It was untouched by the war. It's a university town. It's a tourist trap. It also was the Army headquarters for Europe. So everything was there in one place. And if you look up here, you can see this piece has obviously been blown up and pieces all around in here. Under Louis XIV's direction in 1689, the French burned the castle. They didn't do a very good job, so they came back in 1693 on Louis' orders yet again. Only this time, they brought 27,000 pounds of black powder. And that's when all of that damage was done. This part of the building was built after, and is the only part that's really tolerable, but it draws a lot of people. And they do this. It used to be every June, July, and August when we were there in the 60s. I know they still do it, but I don't think they do it that frequently. And it's in commemoration of the burning. That's what the Wilwerding is. And we sat up on, another lieutenant, his wife, and my wife and I, we sat on the opposite riverbank, got there about 4 in the afternoon, bought food, several beers, deck of cards. Figured, we got a good spot, dead on. And long about 7 o'clock, other folks started coming in, bringing their blankets and towels. And the grass kept disappearing. By 9 o'clock, there was not a blade of grass to be seen, because it was either blankets or towels that they were sitting on, and they butt right up against you. And we didn't care. And then this goes on, and it's about a half-hour performance. And after that, we said, there's not a lot of point in running to the car to leave, because we're just going to go nowhere fast. So we decided to go back to the city, went across the bridge, through the gate tower. And just as we get through the gate tower, I can hear a horn honking and a motor engine revving, and all of a sudden this red sports car shows up on the plaza on the other side of the gate tower, where the sergeant from the German police department is directing traffic. And I look at the driver and saw, it's a lieutenant who had been at the Uncle Ben's rest home the same time I was there. He was not in my class, he was in class behind me. And I thought, this is not going to be pretty. Sergeant got him out of the vehicle. He got a rather lengthy lecture. And the next day, this is Patton Barracks. Dick Wiles knows that place well. And that young lieutenant used to work here on Monday morning. Monday afternoon, he had been banished to North Baden District, out of the headquarters in a heartbeat. That kind of behavior was absolutely not acceptable in Heidelberg. So this is where I worked. Gates here. This is a cavalry post. There are 2 compounds, or actually there's 3 compounds in Heidelberg. 2 of them are cavalry barracks and go back to the 19th century. The other one was the 130th Station Hospital and had been built in the Hitler era, and actually had a signal battalion there at the time. But these buildings are all barracks for the enlisted folks that worked at Campbell or here at Patton. This is the stable right here. And this is the entrance to the 4th Base Post Office, and we had all of this space. And one of the first things you have to do when you come to Germany is you have to get a use for a driver's license. You can't drive otherwise. Your stateside license doesn't work. The Army says you will get a use for a license. And in order to get a license, you have to take a test. And the test is it's on all the international traffic signals. So it's a smart thing to do. So testing is right here. So I go up to take the test after having perused the manual. And I stop at the sergeant's desk to get the test, and on the wall is a sign behind him. It says, remember, you're in Germany. Blend in. When you think about that, that's a very wise thing to say. But the logic of the green machine is at work. Because, all the European license plates, they're long and narrow, black on white. What do we have? U.S. stateside license plates, just like you have on your car today. They're green, and it says U.S. Forces. Now think about that. How am I going to blend in when I drive into town and I already stand out? The Canadians weren't a whole lot better. They had the same size plates, only theirs were black. It said Canadian forces. But the thought is absolutely correct. And to this day, I've never had a personalized license plate. I don't have any stickers of where I've been or any of that kind of stuff on the vehicle. Because you don't blend in, you stand out. And it is very thoughtful because we have a reputation, and they wrote a book about it, it's called The Ugly American. And you don't want to do that, and the military is very sensitive to that, particularly in Europe, less so in other places. So, life in Germany is not always fun and games, or it's not always work. You got weekends off, because the army in Europe in the 60s was an 8 to 5 job, Monday through Friday. So on the weekends, I have a car. The housing area I lived in at the time was right next to the Autobahn. We had our own exit. And you can go wherever you want to go very quickly. Because there were no speed limits on the Autobahns in those days when I was there. So I routinely went 90. I was very comfortable. And you spend more time watching your rearview mirror than you do looking out the windshield. Because if you see somebody blink the lights behind, their headlights behind you, you best get out of the way. Because it's either going to be a Porsche, a BMW, or a high-end Mercedes, and they're going to blow by you like you're standing still. Most of the time I was fine, but there were days, because you can get anywhere quickly. So this is Würzburg. It's a fortress built in the 13th century, this part. The well, the church, and the keep. And part of the reason there are so many castles and fortresses, particularly in Germany, it is a collection of small states, constantly warring with one another. It's like our frontier on the other side of the Mississippi. It was hunting and shooting country, hazardous. And so these are very common. This was the estate, the castle and fortress of the Prince Bishop of Würzburg. He was both a cardinal and a secular prince. And it's another one of those small states. He owned Franconia. So I thought, this is really neat, because back then you could come in here, you drove through here, you drove up this ramp, you could park here and walk up. You cannot do that anymore. Parking is now way down here. But it's kind of fun. This is another view from the river. You can see how dominant it is. This bridge goes into Würzburg, which is off to my left, or your left. And this is a couple of shots on the outside. It took this one in '67 when I was there. That's it today. Because remember, this is only 20 years after the end of the war. So there's still a lot of damage and stuff that's not been repaired. And then this is this one built in 1452. This was as far as you could drive. And you walk from that point on. So I thought, this is really neat. So when my wife got there at night, I said, we gotta go there. So we did. I drove 90 miles an hour. She expressed her opinion of that in 2 words. Slow down! Which I ignored. No surprise. So we went through the fortress, drove across the bridge, which you cannot do anymore today, pedestrian way. Went through this church here, went through this church here, and wandered around, got in the car, drove back home. That was very easy to do when you were there. We did not get up here in the upper right corner. You'd see those kind of Baroque looking buildings. Didn't visit 2 trips there, never visited. So maybe a month or so later, it was raining, so we went into the User Library, reference library, which is a library totally of nonfiction. And I'm back there in the architecture section, looking up different things, and I come across this picture. That is the Würzburg residence. That's where the Prince Bishop flew when it got too drafty and cold up there in the hill. And when we were there, only this part was open for tourists. And over here in this corner is the chapel, and that was open. And the Imperial Apartments have since been rehabbed and all the rest of that, and they're open today. But that is the stairwell. And it is absolutely stunning, and it is as huge as this picture makes it look, and I had to compress it down to get it on here. And the designer, he's right here. That's Balthazar Neumann. He did the design, he did not do the painting. And he has designed a lot of churches and this kind of buildings throughout Germany. You can't miss some of his work, and they are superb. Tiepolo, if you spend any time in Venice, you will have seen his work. Because he is Italian, and that's where he did an awful lot of work up there in Venice proper and on the Brenta River just outside of it, and a lot of those castles. But it took us 3 trips before I ever got there. This was part of the education process. You need to do your homework before you go travel. That's Tiepolo's paint job on the ceiling. It is Apollo on the chariot. Come on, there it is. Bringing the sun to the 4 continents. So America, Europe, Asia, and Africa are represented in the corners of the stairwell. And then, of course, you have to have a chapel. So Würzburg is in Bavaria, very Catholic. And this is maybe 8 pews deep. But this was the Prince Bishop personal chapel. And it is every bit as stunning as that picture makes it look, even more so. So even though I was a history major and really was not that big in art when I was in college, I certainly got there after a few short months in Europe. And so this was, we were there 68, basically spent most of the time on the weekends. And I had a very elaborate trip planned for summer of '69 to go to Vienna, down the Danube. And I came home one day and I said to my wife, I said, this was like February of '69, I said, how'd you like to go to Berlin? She looked at me strangely, she said, why are we going to Berlin? I said, well, I'm not going to be here, because I'm getting orders, or I will be getting orders, it didn't happen yet, to send me to Vietnam. So I said, we're not going to do the Vienna trip we've been planning. So she said, okay. So we took the troop train from Frankfurt to Berlin, left Frankfurt at 7 o'clock at night. We got in Berlin at 7 o'clock in the morning in the Dahlem district. It doesn't take 12 hours normally. We spent more time on the siding, letting the milk run go through, than we did moving ourselves. This is the Brandenburg Gate, taken from the west side by me back in 1969. And I am told, and I cannot vouch for it, that you could drive a Volkswagen along the top of that wall, that it was deep enough to do that. So the next day, we're going to take a tour into East Berlin. And so we catch the bus, I'm in uniform, because Berlin is governed still then by the 4-Power Treaty coming out of the World War II. So the East Germans, as long as you're in uniform, the East Germans couldn't do anything. You could flip them a bird, there's nothing they could do except get mad. And so we get to the bus and my wife gets on first. And the bus driver says, if you have any money, give it to your husband. And you can imagine how well that went over. And so I get on and we go back and said, well, why did he say that? And I said, explain to her the Four Power Agreement, because I said it's mandatory in the 60s that you had, if you had money, you had to exchange 5 German marks, West German marks, for 5 East German marks. Now, West German mark in the 60s was worth 25 cents. That was the good old days. It was a great place to be in the 60s. Oh, East German mark was, on a good day, was worth a nickel. So it was not exactly an even exchange. But we avoided it. So we got to the east side where I took that picture, and that's as close as we could get. And it was, you could see it's overrun with people. And we pick up an East German guide when we came through Checkpoint Charlie, and it was a propaganda affair all the way along. And on the bus with us was another captain. He was from Mannheim, which is just up the river from Heidelberg. So we were chit-chatting back and forth. And very little had been done in East Berlin post-war. I mean, we looked at it, he said, they gotta have a rubble factory here, because there were piles of it all over the place. And you walk along a lot of the buildings and stuff, and you can see where they've been hosed down with machine guns. Pockmarked, nope, nothing repaired. If you went to, and I should have put it in, but I didn't. There is an area known as the Gendarmenmarkt that's about maybe a mile away from this particular point. It had 2 churches, a French church and a German church, beautiful Baroque churches in their day, and an opera house. And they're just shells. And you can see how the stone has all been pockmarked and everything. And this is 20 years after the war. And when we were back in '94, we went down there and whoa, they were blow your socks off stunning. So before we left Berlin to get back on the bus, we had coffee and kuchen. Coffee and a piece of cake. Most surly wait staff I think I've ever seen. And since I had an exchange, I had to pay for it with German marks, so I didn't care. And I gave the waiter the 2-mark tip. And all of a sudden, he became my absolute best friend. Because that'd probably pay for his food the rest of the week. So he was quite happy. So we wrapped up our tour in, this explains my fascination with world affairs. In the time I was there, all of this happened. De Gaulle kicked us out of France. We had the 6-day war. One of the other officers was the operations chief, came back in the area where I was and said, we're supporting the wrong people. I looked at him and I said, how is that? He said, we should be supporting the Arabs. We always support the underdog. And they clearly were. And it was over quickly. We had Prague Spring in the spring of '68. Prague's a 4-hour drive from Heidelberg. This is not a foreign event. This is in our backyard when we were there. And happily, protests in Paris, de Gaulle left town, quit. I thought that was really great. I have a biased view. And then just before we left, Gaddafi staged his coup in Libya. So all of that in a 2-year span of time. And so we're there, we're reading it, we're seeing it. It was a very interesting time. So I get my reassignment. I got the orders in March. Do not pass go, do not collect $200, go directly to now. So we leave in April of '69. Stayed with my parents for the month of May. My wife got hired to teach junior high at the Minnetonka School District, which is one of the suburbs on the west side of Minneapolis. A very good school system. She got it late in May. I left the next day. But the good thing from my perspective was she's got an 18-month-old kid to worry about and take care of. Now she has a job to do, so she's got to be fussing with lesson plans, report cards, project grading, and all the rest of the stuff. So that says she's going to be plenty engaged and isn't going to have time to wonder or worry about what I might be doing in a war zone. So I was pleased. And I left the next day. Went out to Fort Lewis, Washington. It did what is called POR, Preparation for Overseas Replacement. So you do some weapons work, you do new uniforms and stuff, and all of this stuff, so that you're going over with somewhat knowing what you're doing. And our introduction to Fort Lewis was, there's two kinds of weather here. It's either raining or it's getting ready to rain. And for the week I was there, that's exactly what transpired. It was raining most of the time, and the rest of the time it was as gray as can be. And it didn't clear out like this at the end of the day. So I took off from the Air Force Base, and we went from Washington State to Hickam Field in Hawaii to Wake Island. How many been there? To refuel. Wake Island, the airport, is sprawled over 2 islands in order to have enough runway to be able to get this puppy up in the air. It was interesting. The tail's hanging off the end, and the engines, and they kick everything they can to get that bird up. Then on to Clark Field in the Philippines, and finally in the Cameron Bay. So this is 22 hours of elapsed time in a cattle plane. Not fun. So I end up being assigned to the 101st Airborne Division. The division headquarters is at Camp Eagle, which is north between Fubai, where the airport is, and Wei. And you all can remember 1968 and the Tet Offensive in Wei. I was down in Binhua City, Binhua Army Base, which is 30 minutes north of Saigon. And you have the air base and the Army base are kind of like this. This is the air base here. 2 pieces of concrete, 2 miles long, and wide enough to land 2 planes, 2 fighter jets on the same runway at the same time. So it's a rather large target. And during my time there, your friendly neighborhood Viet Cong tried 16 times to hit it, to no avail. And if they fall, the rockets are spin stabilized to the right. So then they end up here in our repo depot. Or if they're short, they end up in our admin area. So you have ample opportunity to duck and hide. So one night I'm out there taking a shower and the siren goes off. Oh shit. You hit the deck, because that's all you can do. You don't run to a bunker, because if it lands, you get killed by the shrapnel. You just get as close to the ground as you can. That's it for showers at night. Because most of the attacks had been at night. So 3 days later, I'm out in the shower in the morning. All added up, sirens go off. We got incoming, and it was very close. There was a piece of one of the rockets sitting on the ground, stuck into the ground. 3 guys who worked for me collected Purple Hearts that I'm reasonably certain they were not planning on. And the colonel's driver had been in country maybe a month, one hell of a nice soldier, made the mistake of reaching up and turning off the water because he was out in the shower. Lost his thumb, got sent home. Rockets are deadly things. You know, you've watched enough John Wayne movies, you hit the old song, don't worry about the one that hits you, you'll never hear. We could hear all of the rockets, because they come in addressed to whom it may concern, not to anybody in particular. So come October, I go up to division headquarters, and I have a chance to go into Wei. This is the picture that I took in 1969, obviously war damaged. because the Marines and everything, this was a very ugly fight, because fighting in cities is always terrible. This is what it looks like today. So you see, this is the palace. It is no longer an army headquarters. It's a tourist trap. But it was fantastic. It is a very interesting country. I've not been back. That's another one of those things that's on the list. But I have a feeling, given my current situation, it's not going to get fulfilled. But the people were wonderful in the South. The ones in the North who were not, weren't friendly at all. And I had an opportunity when I was, because I liaised with the Army Division back and forth, so I've been in this, and probably was up there every other month. And I came in one time, and the colonel that I was liaising with said, "You need to come on X date and then bring the G1 with you." I said, "So what's the occasion?" "Oh," he said, "you're getting awarded." Okay. So we fly, my boss has access to the chopper, so we fly in a loach. And if you remember the Magnum PI movies, the very opening scene, they're flying around in a helicopter with an egg with a boom sticking out the back, that's a loach. And we flew 50 feet, 50 knots, no doors. And as you're coming over the Perfume River, which is very aptly named, I might say, and then the walls of the citadel are there, and it's like the bird hit a wall of the aroma that was wafting up on the Perfume River in the city. It was a very interesting experience. We continued on, landed, got our awards, and flew back out the next day. But time with the division was very interesting for me. When I got up there, the major, who's now the deputy, said, "You know, you've been assigned as the admin officer. Go to the building." We had 2 buildings that we worked out of. He said, "Your office is next door. Take a couple days and see if you think we really need an admin officer." Okay. So I spent 2 days and come back in, and I said, "You don't." And I said, "The sergeant major does everything, and he does it really well, and there's no sense putting an officer in there and getting him in line." And he said, "Well, that was my thought as well. So you are going to be doing officer management from this point on." That had been his job before he became the deputy. So I'm now, as a very junior captain, I'm doing a major's job, which was quite interesting. If you get loaded, I had a lot of opportunities to learn a lot of things. And performance was important because the Army has a habit. If they recognize that you're capable of doing the job, they give you more to do. So it just kept piling on, and the deputy came over one day and he said, "You're going to be doing the briefing from now on in the division top." Okay, I was doing the prep for it anyway. Now all I got to do is talk. That's easy, or so I thought. And so go down to do the first division briefing. And the briefing room in the TOC, Tactical Operations Center, it's almost like a movie theater. It's sloped, it's 8 rows deep, it's 6 seats on either side of the central aisle, and they fill up. And at 5 o'clock, the aide says, "Gentlemen, the division commander," and everybody stands up. At attention. The commander comes in, sits down, and the normal routine of a briefing is you get the operations brief, then you get the intelligence brief, and the logistics brief, and I'm the closing act. So I do the personnel brief. So I do the brief, and I noticed partway through the briefing that the general went like this, which meant absolutely nothing to me. And I finished my briefing. That was it. And the general got up and left, and everybody else got up and left, and I left and went to dinner. My boss comes over, sits down at dinner. So we got to go to the TOC at 7 o'clock. I said, "What for?" He said, "The briefing did not go well today." I said, "Oh, geez, first time here, it doesn't go well. That's not good scene." We go over to the brief, over to the TOC, to the briefing room, and the G3 the operations officer for the division headquarters. And he was one hell of a good officer. When he finally retired, he was a 3-star. And he had been the G1 prior, and he had extended to be the G3. Well, he's chewing his briefer, and the G2 is the intel briefer, a new posterior. Because their briefing had been not good, full of mistakes, and he was not happy. And then when he finished with them, he goes on to the logistics brief and chews on him for a bit. And then he turns to me and I'm thinking, oh, shit. And he said, your briefing was fine. You need to speak up. The general's hard of hearing. Nobody told me, and that's what this meant. So life is full of all kinds of interesting things. So what all did I learn while I was there? You know, you blend in, you do your homework first. If you know a little bit of the language, use it. You make instant friends. Because when we got there, the three lieutenants and I went to dinner one night. We went to a Gasthaus, which is German for a guest house. That's a nice, small restaurant. And, you know, we got short hair, button-down collars on our shirt. We're clearly not German. And they bring in, because we're in Heidelberg, she brings over 3 English language menus. And I said, I'm thinking, I'm in Germany. I've had German in school. So I called her back. I said, Fräulein, eine deutsche Speisekarte bitte? And she looked at me, her eyes got that big, she went off and got the German menu for me. And from that point on, I ordered off the German menu without any trouble. But the appreciation was very obvious. Made a lot of points. If you're on time, you're late. And a lot of you know that I'm always early, most of the time. The only one who gets to come on time is the general. Because that's when the briefing starts. You'd best be there already in your seat, ready for the general to arrive. That's military. So if you're on time, you're late. Know your audience before you brief. I just covered that one. And while I was there, I learned to juggle 27 balls at the same time. Because I had a lot of different things I kept doing because they just kept throwing more stuff on my desk. In fact, when the deputy went for R&R, Colonel, there's 3 other majors in the office. He goes to each one of them to get one of them to be the deputy for the week that he's gone. One ran the officer clubs, or the club system, one ran the PX system, the other one was brand new and he was leaving for R&R. And so they all begged off him. And they all said, give it to Lee. And so the colonel comes over and he said, you're the deputy. So instead of coming to work at 7:30 like I usually was, I'd show up at 6 because a stack of paper is this high. And every time I turned around, Sergeant Major filled the damn inbox again. But you just work your way through things. It was fascinating because I got exposed to all kinds of stuff that most folks wouldn't. And so the other thing, I learned I liked it. And it worked, and it helped me very much in the various jobs I had in the real world back here. Because I could juggle all of that stuff all at the same time. Use your staff. That's why you have it. You don't have to be the one-man gang. But the most important one is this one. You have to take care of your soldiers. You are responsible for those people. And as a company commander, you're the mother, the father, the financial advisor, the marriage counselor, the legal advisor, and just about any other thing that they have a question for. You've got to have the answer for it. Because these kids are 19 years old to 20. Most of the time, it's the first time they've been this far away from home in their life. And if you take care of them, they'll take care of you when the time comes that it's necessary. But that's leadership. That's what that job requires. And when I went down, when my son took a company down to Fort Riley, and I went down to see him, and he said, you know, he was 24 as a captain. He said, there's some of these guys who've been, even some of my sergeants, which you wouldn't expect it. He said, I'm giving counseling to one of my NCOs. He's 35. I'm 24, and I'm single. He's married, he's got marriage problems. I said, hey, welcome to the job, my friend. But that's the way it all works. So, questions? Gary?
Can you follow that through your commitments afterwards?
Absolutely.
Can you repeat the question?
Lee spent a lot of time at the Pentagon and other roles. I was curious what those next steps were.
You have to. Well, I got off active duty after 4 years. I had originally planned on making it a career. The Army was this big when I was in Vietnam. The Army went from that big to this big. Before I left Vietnam, we had stood down 4 divisions. We not only stood down 4 divisions, they went out of the force structure. So the handwriting was on the wall. We're getting a lot smaller, we're going to stay that way for a while. And so I opted to get up because I know there's going to be a rift. There has to be a rift because you're going to have too many officers left. And so I opted out, got a job without any trouble, but I really liked what I had done in the Army, so I went back in the reserves. So in January of '71, I went back in the reserve components and went into an infantry brigade. Not an infantry, I'm an AG officer. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed working with soldiers. They're fun. They can be absolutely frustrating as hell. They can do the dumbest things you can imagine. They think they're invisible once they put their green suit on and head off for summer camp. It's a challenge, but it's fun. And I did that. I was the AG, then I was the G1, went to a PSYOPs battalion as an executive officer, came back to the brigade as the executive officer. So I was number 3 guy in the organization of 4,500 soldiers. It was fun. And then when I started consulting, I'm gone all the time. And I had a very understanding wife, but I was pushing my luck to be gone during Monday through Friday and then disappearing on the weekends as well. So I got out of the troop units, got the assignment at the Pentagon, which is required 2 weeks a year. But again, that was an interesting place. And I fortunately retired in '94 because where that plane came in, that's exactly where I worked.
Did you get called up when you were in the reserve?
No, I came very close. When Desert Storm happened, I had pulled my 2-week tour in November because the colonel that I worked with called me and said, can you come in these 2 weeks? I said, sure. So when I came in, what the discussion was, and I went to a briefing for second day I was there, are we going to rotate the troops? I'm saying, that'd be the dumbest damn thing you could do. It's just but stupid. You've got all these guys there and gals, and they're learning and they're been there, so you're going to take those home, send them and bring in some other people and start over again? This is stupid. The next day, we started working on not rotating the troops, but bringing the 7th Corps from Germany. And it was a totally different situation. It was very interesting. My son was commissioned in 90, graduated 90, commissioned in 90 through ROTC, same place I did. And went off at armor school, finished the armor school. The Army said, well, you can go home for a week and go for Christmas, and then come back. And put him in another, what was it called? It was a recon leaders course. And I'm thinking, he's an armor officer. They don't run recon. Those grunts do that. And then it was a 5-week course, and then the light bulb went on. Oh. Once the ground war started, if it had not gone as well as it did, he'd have been in the first wave of officer replacements going to the desert. But he didn't get there that time. He got there later 4 times.
Was Richard Nixon was the president during your time there? 69?
Nixon, yep, yes, he was.
Did he reduce the number because during Lyndon Johnson's, he had what, a couple 100,000 reduction?
Well, when the import structure in Vietnam got to 500,000 shortly after TEP of 68. So Johnson was still in office. And Nixon over time eventually squeezed down, and it was Vietnamization, which was the right thing, because the reality of it is, you can't win somebody else's war for them and set up a government. And you'd have thought we would have remembered that, rather than having to do it twice more, 20 years later. And my son got to spend 4 trips in Iraq instead of just 1. Any other questions?
I was in Berlin in 1990, and in the distance, I was walking with my husband and brother-in-law, and in the distance were a number of Mercedes and a woman in a red dress. It was Richard Nixon, because it was in September, and there's a dedication.
Yeah.
But I had visited the east side, and it was still very depressing, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And they hadn't done much in 1990.
No. In 94, the symbol of East Berlin was the crane. They were all over the place in downtown Berlin, repairing. And they had so much to do. And totally throughout East Germany, because when I was in West Germany, they were starting to repair the Autobahns to replace them that Hitler had built in the 30s. When I was there in 1994, we went over, John was nearing the end of his tour, so we flew into Vienna, he took the train down, and we went up through Prague, into Dresden, and into Berlin. And guess what they were doing on the Autobahn? They were repairing and replacing the Autobahns that Hitler had built in the 30s. This is 1994. So nothing had been done in the East. I mean, it's fun to go as a tourist here, but it was also very educational to be there when I did. And going back, I have a different perspective on what I'm looking at. But it is very interesting. My wife loved doing it. My son's going back and forth, because his first duty assignment, just as he asked for, was Germany. Well, I can see it's 5 to 6, so I'm standing between you and dinner. Thank you.